2 months ago, I made a video explaining why Trump's tariffs were going to have major and lasting implications on the fashion industry. I did my best to react in real time to a changing situation with absolutely no certainty, evidenced by the fact that a few days after I put out that video, a tweet from Trump almost changed the entire thing. I definitely still stand by that video, but I think a lot of the predictions I made were made in the dark and based off panicked reactions from brands at the time. But now, 2 months on, it's become clear we haven't seen something of this magnitude rock the fashion industry since the pandemic. And it's also clear that fashion is repeating the same mistakes they made then, now. Don't get me wrong, the situation is still volatile, but we do have a bit more clarity on how this has and will continue to impact fashion. So I think it's time to go back and look at whether my predictions did or didn't come true, and basically talk about everything that's happened in these big 2 months of shakeups and unpredictability. We have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Before we do, welcome back to my channel. My name's Katie. I talk a lot about sustainable fashion and try to put that in the context of other things happening in the fashion industry and the wider world, especially social media. If that sounds good to you, then make sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on my other social medias, and let's get into it. So going back to that original tariff video I did, let's go over the highlights about what I predicted would happen. Firstly, that shopping and consumer spending would temporarily go down, or that we might see this money reallocated to other avenues like thrifting and vintage shopping. I also predicted that brands would start to focus on some key areas like recycling, nearshoring, made in America, maybe. Basically anything that can help them try not to raise prices too much, but also remain competitive. The other prediction I made was that garment workers would be the one to bear the biggest brunt of this entire situation. And in a way, it pains me to say, but I don't think my predictions were that far off. Like I said, a lot of brands panicked, made hasty decisions that they tried to then reverse weeks later as Trump brought in a new policy or negotiated a new trade deal. And we've already started to see the collapse of some supply chains happening in fashion, speaking to how upended the entire industry is by this situation. There was, of course, a lot of stock fluctuation every time Trump tweeted, and a lot of interesting things happened, especially to do with consumer behavior. Let's talk about what did happen. Like I predicted, a lot of brands panicked and started immediately uprooting their supply chains, trying to move out of China, trying to find some area of the planet where Trump wasn't wreaking havoc. But somewhat ironically, for a lot of brands, moving their production to America was reportedly last on their list of things to do. There's definitely been a flurry of interest in made in America manufacturing. I've seen a lot of headlines talking about the possibility of it, but it doesn't seem like brands have been wooed by this prospect yet. And as far as I'm still aware, American manufacturing is still last on the list for a lot of brands. I know that Shein was one of the first big brands to try and move their production, cut ties with their Chinese suppliers, to which the Chinese government basically said, no, you can't do that. But then Shein has still gone ahead with moving some of their suppliers out of the country. So I'm not quite sure what's happened there and how they got around that. Meanwhile, and something I definitely didn't predict, is Temu announced they're changing their entire business model, changing from a direct shipping option to consumers to a local fulfillment model. And this is crazy since direct to consumer is the way they've kept prices so low. So I'm not sure what the long-term plan is here. If Temu changing their business model isn't enough of an indicator of how panicked fashion was, the industry sent in the big guns to meet with Trump and try to get him to change his mind. Anna Wintour herself, along with 2 CEOs of major American fashion associations, met with Trump at the White House. There was also a separate meeting which included Trump meeting the CEOs of Walmart and Target, 2 big fashion players in America. I'm not sure entirely how that conversation went, but reportedly they basically reminded Trump that the fashion industry in America is a $500 billion industry, and continuing to play around with it might result in panicked consumers, empty shelves, and panicked brands. Speaking of panicked brands, some immediately reacted to the tariff upset by increasing their prices, but others, like Urban Outfitters, Gap, and Abercrombie & Fitch, didn't. They chose to shoulder the costs instead. Why? Because the American market is too big to alienate all of the consumers there. These brands have wanted to keep up the illusion of a calm front, and much of their reactions to these tariffs have been happening behind the scenes or in long-term planning. I'd say this seems to be the more popular approach, and we've seen a lot of brands trying to slowly bring in price changes or offset them in another way. For example, some brands announced intentions to raise their prices but not bring these new prices in until the end of summer. This is definitely definitely to ease consumers into the idea of paying for higher prices rather than a somewhat more panicked approach of changing prices now and changing them later as Trump does his thing. But I know that a lot of brands will still be worried about raising prices. And that's why some brands have instead opted to do other things, like changing their approach to ordering stock. Reportedly, a lot of brands in the industry are focusing on buying into timeless styles rather than risky seasonal ones. And some have actually opted to protect the cost of their most popular designs so that consumers can continue to buy them at the same price, and opting instead to change the price of their newer designs so consumers can't tell the difference. And some brands like Tala have opted to just remove certain designs from their website that would have been impacted by tariffs for customers shopping in that region, because they decided that was a better move than customers having to see changing or rocketing prices as tariffs fluctuate. Going back to the topic of stock for a second, just like we saw during the pandemic, at the peak of uncertainty of tariffs, we saw a lot of brands cancelling orders from suppliers or suspending them whilst they waited for the situation to sort itself out, only for a lot of them to come running back to their suppliers when Trump announced a temporary pause on the tariff situation and brands decided suppliers could go ahead with them. But one of the new situations that came about was a lot of brands telling their suppliers to take the longest route possible when shipping their orders so that by the time they got to the border, the tariff situation might have changed. And for a lot of brands, this actually paid off because the 2-week difference in your order arriving at the border would have made such a difference. And I bet a few brands felt very smug about that decision. One of the major things that happened in advertising was the Made in America slogan becoming very popular. And that's actually resulted in a lot of legal issues, but we're going to come back to that in a minute. One of the reactions you probably already know about is Chinese manufacturers clapping back at the entire situation by taking over TikTok with false claims about their luxury products being available to buy directly from them. But I've already done a video covering this if you want to go watch. It's a very interesting situation and it definitely shook things up in the fashion industry and caused a lot of tension. Those were the major highlights I kind of noticed happening over the past couple of months. A lot of those reactions were based on fashion's worst nightmare of what would happen with Trump's fluctuating tariff situation and potential dips in consumer confidence. And it's only with 2 months hindsight that we can look back at this situation and figure out what did happen so that we can see whether fashion reacted well or not. So let's do just that. Starting with the fallout for consumers. The immediate reaction was people saying that they were going to be cutting back on spending, at least on social media, notably, especially from Shein and Temu. This was, of course, after many people panicked and bought tons of stuff they probably didn't need right before the tariffs came in. So not that much of a win for sustainability. There was also a lot of TikToks I saw complaining about shipping times drastically rising from these two companies, which I think didn't help their reputation and maybe spurned another wave of consumers dropping them. I've also seen a lot of people complaining about stocks and sizing issues online, maybe to do with brands buying into stuff less or having trouble with shipping new stuff. It is too soon to know whether this is going to have long-term effects on consumption. And a lot of people pointed out in my last video that although it's a win, our consumption is going down, it might be a temporary sentiment that goes back when fashion stabilizes itself. Like I said, it's too soon to know, but it has been reported that Shein and Temu are struggling to win back consumers, even as the situation has evened out a bit. I've been covering the news that Shein and Temu initially chose to withdraw from the US markets, pull back advertising spend, and focus on the European consumer instead. Now they've changed tack and are trying to lure back in US shoppers, which is unsurprising considering that was always their biggest market. But have US shoppers gone back to them? After all of this reputational damage and the withdrawing of these companies from the US market, it's likely this is going to have a long-term impact on people's perception of the companies. I don't know whether the average shopper has been carefully tracking the news of tariffs and understands that situation has now changed. And from a lot of TikToks I've seen, it looks like a lot of people have said a permanent goodbye to the company, whether that was because they thought the situation wouldn't change and they would be forced to not shop them, or whether because of this situation removing their ability to shop, they've had a moment of awakening and realized they don't need these items that they're spending loads of money on. Especially since, as I predicted, consumers have found new avenues to shop that don't rely on the tariff situation. Resale, for example, has experienced a wave of new customers, just like I thought it would. And I think this probably shows that, like many of the comments predicted, our consumption isn't going to be going down, it's just going to be going into new areas. Reports coming in from a couple of months after the tariff situation suggest that consumer confidence is now going back up and US shoppers are beginning to shop again, which I'm sure brands are breathing a sigh of relief for. But now brands are left with long-term consequences of their actions, like how fashion raised its prices more than jewelry during all of this chaos, and it means consumers now think one is a better investment than the other. They're going to be trying to shake that perception for a while. Speaking of headaches, let's talk about what the fallout has been for the legal situation of the tariffs and marketing brands have chosen. Other than the pretty funny fact that some brands have started suing Trump for the tariff situation, there have been a few lawsuits popping up about the validity of brands using the Made in the USA slogan to market their products now. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of news cropping up about this in the next few months and even years, and maybe potential tightening of legislations in the future about what actually constitutes a made in label. But anyway, I think we should move on to how the fashion industry profits have been impacted by tariffs so far. Brands have been pretty vocal, both to consumers and to their shareholders, about how tariffs have been impacting their business. Zara directly blamed tariffs for their disappointing Q1 results. Lululemon is another brand that was vocal about tariffs' impact. It's likely that we're going to be seeing a lot of similar headlines from brands this year as the wave of tariff implications catches up. But overall, the reports are that tariffs haven't led to soaring prices yet. All of the headlines are kind of celebrating this fact and saying maybe the tariffs haven't been so bad. But the full impact of tariffs on profits and margins won't be seen until late summer or autumn this year. The reports coming out now are early indicators that suggest this hasn't had much of an impact, and the prices of clothes are actually falling right now. But as I said, it's an early indicator that doesn't cover the long-term fallout of all of this change and how fashion has reacted and put new measures into place, and also how consumers will have reacted long term. Already, since those early indicator reports have come out, other headlines have said that prices have started to rise now. So it definitely seemed like a premature celebration from the industry. But again, we'll have to wait and see. I kind of want to talk briefly about my new speculations and conclusions I'm drawing from everything that's happened in the past few months. And then maybe we'll do another video in 6 months or a year reacting to these predictions. We already saw resale gain in popularity, but I think we're still in for a wave of TikToks glamorizing repairing clothes, and especially tying this in to community events, getting together, repairing clothes together, learning new skills. I wonder if this is also going to influence a new wave of influencers who are less buying focused and more creativity focused in fashion, because obviously so many influencers are just like shopping influencers, and people have started to call that out already pre-tariff, but like with tariffs making things so much more expensive to shop, people are gonna be wanting like alternative viewpoints, and I think this might be the time for like creative upcycling influencers to really rise in the mainstream. Maybe, I'm sure this is already happening, but I haven't seen reports yet, so I can't say for certain, so I'm going to put it in as another prediction. But the cuts on wages and increased working hours for garment workers will have been the first thing suppliers did to minimize costs, and in the next year or two we'll see just as many reports coming out that major brands cut orders and put millions of workers at risk as we did during the pandemic. I also think there's going to be a suspicious amount of organic content saying things like, me running back to Shein, now tariffs are over, that are low-key funded by the brand as a guerrilla campaign to like make people aware online. Next, again unconfirmed but very likely already happening, is a steep decline in the amount of brands actually trying to use quality materials. I think because the cost of raw materials going up, coupled with consumers spending less, makes this a simple profit versus loss equation, and we've already seen some material supply chains struggling. So I think this is again one of the quickest things to cut to improve profits. Another one for TikTok and social media, I think we're going to be seeing another wave of like timeless, quiet luxury and dependable fashion trends in response to brands pushing this stop as the thing they've bought into because it's less risky than new trends. I think brand language is going to be a lot of like, invest in this, going back to basics, blah, blah, blah. And I think again, with the availability of different styles being minimized, it's going to impact the influencer economy. Like, we're really going to start to see a divide in people who are shopping influencers only and influencers who can wear the same thing as everyone else but style it with their personal style so that it looks different and then they stand out from the crowd. I really think that this is going to have like a reckoning on influencers and the TikTok shopping economy long term. And finally, I think brands investing even less in sustainability and using tariffs as the ultimate excuse is just a given. It's the perfect economy to promote an everyone for themselves mentality. And I think when brands don't hit their 2030 goals in 5 years, tariffs will be the big thing they blame. It will be on all of the like sustainability reports. And so many of the brands won't acknowledge the fact that they weren't anywhere near on track to meet these goals pre-tariff. One thing I really want to get more data on is how suppliers are dealing with this entire situation, because a lot of the news I've seen has been very brand focused. As we spoke about, many brands are putting a lot of the impact on Trump's changing mind on suppliers, getting them to delay or rush orders. And I wonder if that was the case every single time Trump changed his mind, suppliers would then get a hurried message from brands telling them to do this or do that, and how that's going to impact suppliers' businesses and the workers there. The tariffs themselves feel like they've removed any progress fashion has been making towards supplier loyalty and building bridges with suppliers that could then lead to investment in sustainability initiatives and, you know, just increased protection for suppliers who normally don't have a lot of continuity from brands. The tariff situation has exacerbated the game of moving chairs fashion has always played, where they always have the upper hand with suppliers because they can just choose to go somewhere else and find somewhere cheaper. It's a major blow for any sort of sustainable fashion movement. I know that a lot of smaller brands and sustainable brands have been struggling in the wake of tariffs because they often have lower margins and less market share than bigger brands like H&M or Shein. I've kind of been talking on my channel about how sustainable brands in particular have been changing their marketing tactics to try woo consumers with something other than sustainability, because sustainability is not a selling point right now and a lot of brands don't see it as a viable business model, which is heartbreaking and I think will have major long-term impacts. Just like we have a pre and post pandemic world, I think we're going to have a pre and post tariff world, and we'll be talking about the implications of tariffs for years to come. The entire fallout for consumers, for brands, for the industries, for suppliers, and for garment workers will haunt the fashion industry. And I guess that answers a couple of comments I got from that first video from people saying that this wouldn't have a major impact. I think we've proved in this video that it did have a major impact and it will continue to. So yeah, with that, I'm going to end this video here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've covered, whether I missed out any interesting reactions from fashion because I couldn't be on top of everything. But yeah, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and I hope you have a lovely day and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.